here, I'm just going to go through the dialogue. It's like a chain of verses, but what's interesting is that in this particular surah, in a chain of just 10 verses, you see 3 illas. And illa means except. So you see 3 exceptions in just 10 verses 3 times in a row, in like 10 or 11 verses. And it's interesting. My little brother one time, and he made me kind of like dive into this more, but he told me, he was like, I feel like this is the page of illa, like the page of exceptions, like what's going on here. So subhanAllah, when you go through it as a chain, it's really...
She's an exception.
Yeah. So subhanAllah, the way it starts off, the first illa, it says فَسَجَدَ الْمَلَائِكَةُ كُلُّهُمْ أَجْمَعُونَ إِلَّا إِبْلِيسَ. So it says that all the angels, bowed down to Adam. They all basically, and what does bowing down to Adam mean? What does that signify? It's not about the bow. It's not the physical prostration. It's that all the angels followed in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's command, right? They all just submitted to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's will. Allah wanted this to happen. He's their creator. Bam, they did it. Except Iblis. So here the exception is not a good exception. Like, he did not follow Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's command. So except Iblis, why was he not from the prostrators? Why did he not listen? And in verse number 33, he explains. They said, how can I bow down to somebody that you created from dry clay? He's just so full of himself. He's like, that exception here, the exception of Iblis not bowing, not submitting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's will, what does that show us? It represents arrogance, pure arrogance. I'm better. Like, you created me from this, and he's created from this, and you want me to bow down to him? Like, what are you saying? It's kind of like that kind of showy feeling. And then he's also kind of saying, do you know who I am? Like, do you know what you're asking me to do? It just, again, just very cocky kind of about him. And he's just all about himself. But the next exception is really interesting, because in the beginning, he's the first exception. Iblis is the first exception, but now he's creating the next exception. Okay? So this is in verse 39. Now Iblis is making an exception. And what does he say? He says, I am going to misguide them all. I'm going to stray everybody. And I'm going to make immorality and wrong seem good. Like, he's like, I'm going to make the wicked, the bad stuff seem good to them. I'm going to beautify this world to them in ways beyond imagination. I'm going to steer them all away, basically. I'm going to lure them in. I'm going to deviate them. He's challenging Allah. But then he says, except. And here's the exception that we want to be a part of, right? This is where we want to be a part of. He said, except your loyal, sincere servants. And what's interesting about this, that even though Shaitan was so arrogant, so full of himself, he acknowledged his weakness, that he can't steer everybody away. He can't lure everybody away. Like, even though he's so arrogant, so full of himself, but he still acknowledges in this verse that he can't do it all, and he says, except there's going to be an exception. And that's the exception we want to be a part of. The loyal servants. So who were these loyal servants? Who are these loyal servants? They are those who are so busy with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that, they're too busy to be a slave to anything else. To their egos, like Shaitan was, to the music industry, to the fashion industry. At the end of the day, when you think of the word ibad, one time somebody told me, like, why does Allah call us ibad, slaves? Like, we're not slaves. And then, right now in this industry, in this society, we're just like, we want to be free, do what you want to do, be yourself. And that's fine, right? But if you're not a slave to Allah, no matter what you say, you're a slave to something else. You're going to be a slave to fashion. You're going to be a slave to food. You're going to be a slave to your own nafs, to your own ego, your own desires. So that's
one thing about the word slave.
Yeah.
Is it okay to say?
Yeah. Go.
Just in the Christian Bible, it always used to be slave. Mm-hmm. And then as the new editions of the Bible came along, they changed the word to servant.
Servant, yeah.
And there's a huge difference between servant and slave. Mm-hmm. So, we should be honored to be a slave to Allah.
Exactly, yeah.
I didn't interrupt you. I just think it's a very strong word, a very meaningful word if you think about it. But it's usually has such a negative connotation, but in this way it's very positive.
Exactly. And when you're a slave to anything else, or a servant to anything else but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala,
no, slave is good.
Yeah, either way, if you're an abd in general, or an amma in our case, like a female servant, if we're a female slave to anything, it's chaining. Whether, even if it's to yourself, like, oh, I'm just going to follow what I want. Then you're a servant to your desires. But when you're a servant, when you put your whole will with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that is the key to liberation. That's the only way, because He's your creator, He's your fashioner. That is freeing, because He knows what's best for you. And just like Iblis, like he was from the wrong exception, and that took him out of that exception. And then when He made the exception, the second exception, that's the exception we want to be a part of, because that is the key to liberation, when you submit your will to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So now, as we keep going, now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is making the final exception. And this is interesting here. This is verse 42. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, affirming, Inna ibadi laysa laka alayhim sultan. Again, like the same word, ibad, like my servants, verily, like indeed, you have no power over them. He's telling Shaitan this now. He's like, you have absolutely no power over them. Then he says, except. Now there's the third illa, and the last one in these few verses. Except those who put themselves in the wrong and follow you, Shaitan. So he's saying, everybody is actually, like, so if you just think for a second right now, like if you're visualizing this whole thing. So Shaitan, in his arrogance, he's so full of himself, he thinks that everybody's going to follow him except these few ibad, these few servants of Allah. But Allah is like making the point straight. He's like, actually, it's the opposite. Actually, like everybody is going to be a ibad to me. Because the fitrah, the human nature, is to, you're a part of Allah Ta'ala. Like you are, Allah created you, Allah fashioned you. Whether you're physically submitting to Him willingly 5 times a day, your heart is still beating, right? Whether you like it or not, you get a cut, it's gonna wound by itself. That's Allah. Assalamu alaikum. Alhamdulillah. So Allah is still, whether you like it or not, your body is submitting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so Allah is telling him that everybody is actually my ibad except the few who follow you. So the real exception is the exception of Shaitan, and that he's not going to be included in the ibad, and whoever follows him. So Allah is like here setting the record straight, like you are the exception. Don't call my ibad the exception. You are the real exception. Everybody who follows you is the real exception. So it's so interesting. He kind of like corners him, and he like is setting the record that this is how it is. Everybody else is my ibad, and it's an honor to be a part of the ibad of Allah Ta'ala, the servants of Allah. So this is like the end of these verses, that the reflection that I had. And just to end it with this verse, in Surah Al-Ra'd, there's a verse that says that وَلِلَّهِ يَسْجُدُ مَنْ فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ, that to Allah prostrate everything that's in the heaven and the earth, right? Every single thing, and ظِلَالُهُم, and their shadows, and their shadows بِالْغُدُوِّ وَالْأَصَالِ, like 24/7, like 24/7. And my friend recently asked me, she's like, what does this mean? Can you research it for me? And subhanAllah, it kind of goes in touch with this verse, because the translation that I was reading in the footnotes, the Mufassir was saying that, just like how I was saying earlier, every single organ in your body is submitting to Allah, whether you like it or not. Mm-hmm. And on top of that, your shadow, like when you have a shadow, like that's the type of prostration. So you imagine the intricacy that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala used in this verse to show you that everything is submitting to Him, and it's an honor to be a part of that. And we don't want to be a part of the exception that Shaitan and his followers are, to be so full of yourself that you don't want to be that submitter to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as well. So that was a reflection I have. I would love to go around if anybody wants to add something. I think it was just really interesting to see those 3 illas, the 3 exceptions in a row. SubhanAllah.
Do you have any scholarship on it gets worse the longer